Now that we've created the first several parts of our CRUD system, the index page and our show page, which let us read our colors, and now we also have our new page, which lets us create new colors, let's move on to what I think of as being one of the more challenging parts of a CRUD system, and that is giving ourselves the ability to edit or update our system. So what I've done here is I've already created a new file. Edit.php is what I've called it. This is going to be my edit page. What I want to go ahead and do with it for starters before I forget is I'm going to go ahead and link to it from my index and show pages. So here in the main data table in my index page, where I have just my dummy edit link for each of my colors right now, I'm going to turn that into an actual link for the edit page. There we are. And very similar to what happened with the show page, if you think about it, the edit page is always going to need to know which color it is that we're editing, so I'm going to need to pass an ID to it as well. The ID, of course, is stored along with the other pieces of data about our color, so the same way that I was able to access the ID to splice it into the URL for our show page, just a couple lines above where my cursor is now, I'll be able to do the same thing here with the edit link. That should do the trick. I'm going to go ahead and take that link the way I have it right now, and I'm going to go ahead and copy it. And then I'm going to jump over to the show page itself. And on the show page, down in the main body, I've also put a place in where I can put an edit link from that page. So if the user is actually showing the page at the moment, they will be able to go ahead and go directly to the edit page for that color. Here on this page, though, the actual ID is not stored in a variable called fields. Instead, we have it stored in a variable called selected color. So I'll go ahead and make that change, and at that point we should be all set up with our edit links on our index and show pages. Let's take a look at it in the browser and make sure those look like they're set up correctly. Here in the browser, I'll go ahead and refresh what I have. If I go to one of my colors, I have my little edit link that I've CSS'd up to make it look nice that I've stuck down here in the bottom corner. If I go ahead and inspect that, I can see that that edit link has the ID of 1. It looks like that is the same ID, let's see, yep, the same ID that's used for the show link. If I go to any of my other table rows, the show link for this particular color is ID 9, and the edit link is ID 9. So it looks like it's working just fine here on the index page. If we go over and we take a peek at the show page, again, let me just inspect this. What I would be expecting to see here for this color is ID 2. I can see it up there in the address bar. And if I inspect that actual link, it looks like I have ID 2. So I think we have the links to our edit page in there correctly. If I actually go ahead and click that link in this case, it takes me over to my edit page, which is currently empty. It is, though, passing it the ID the way that I wanted it to. So now that we have the proper way of being able to get into the edit page, we can then focus on putting the edit page together itself. Unlike most of the examples we've done previously, I've started off with absolutely nothing here on the edit page. My edit page is utterly and completely blank. When we go to put this edit page together, I think probably what I'm going to end up doing is borrowing a lot of code from other pages we've put together. Because if you think about what an edit page needs to do, it's really a kind of a strange conglomeration of a lot of the things that we've done already, mostly on the new and the show pages. Kind of like on the show page, the edit page needs to know a color to be able to show. That's why we were passing an ID to it the way we just were. Same basic way the show page works. The show page needed to know what color to show. So we're going to have some code similar to what we had in the show page for loading our colors so that we can then access the appropriate color to then be able to edit it. The edit page, though, is also going to have some similarities to the new page in the fact that the edit page is going to have a form. That form is going to have to be validated. We can't allow a user to edit a color and in editing making that color become invalid. So there's going to be aspects of the show page, there's going to be aspects of the new page that are all going to need to be thrown together here into the edit page. The edit page, though, also is going to have to do a little bit of work its own unique sort of work, in that whenever a color actually is edited, we will have to, instead of adding a new color to our colors file, we'll have to find a way to actually update a color that's already there. As far as expected behavior goes, what I would like to see with the edit page is that whenever we select to edit a color by clicking one of our edit links, I'd like to see a page that essentially looks like the new page, except the form that appears, instead of being empty, the way that it would be on the new page. I would like on the edit page for the form to already be filled with the data for the color that we're editing. So the user can see all of the colors, pieces of data there filled into the form for them. They can then simply make whatever little changes to it that they want and then submit those changes. If any of the data they submit is invalid, I would expect to see the same sort of behavior we had on the new page. So let's go ahead and get started. I think what I'm going to do first is let me actually take a copy of my entire new page the way it stands right now, and I'm just going to drop that copy in over here on my edit page. So at that point, the edit page is essentially an exact duplicate of exactly what I have on the new page. Now let me go through and start kind of filling some of this out a little bit. One of the very first things I might add before I forget is what happens if we somehow find our way to the edit page without providing an ID. Similar to the way over on the show page, right, we started off by checking to make sure we actually had an ID to use. We're going to want something similar to that on the edit page. So over on the edit page, let me start off at the very, very beginning by making sure that we actually have an ID available as a get parameter. Let me check this with an if statement. I'll say if is set, and then I'll take a look in the get array and make sure that I actually have an ID. In this particular case, what I could do is I could then take all of the following logic that's necessary to work with that ID and I could put it into that if statement, but that's a lot of code to have embedded in an if statement, or at least it seems it to me. If I could avoid doing that, I would like to avoid it. So I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to change the logic of this around and say if we don't have an ID, and then I'll specify what I want to happen. And what I do want to happen is that if I don't have an ID, I want to go ahead and redirect the user somewhere else. So let me use our header function, and I'll redirect the user back to the index page. I can't think of anywhere more appropriate to send them at the moment if we don't have an ID. Typically, I would want to provide some kind of error message, but the error message isn't something that I would put together here. So what I'm going to do instead is for the index page, I'm going to pass it some sort of imaginary error. I'll just say error message 1. I could then, over on the index page, check for a get parameter of error 1, and then based on that, know that that meant that I had sent them back to the index page because no ID had been provided. I could use that exact same thing from the show page if I happen to need it. Let me also go ahead and throw an exit in here just to make sure that none of the other code executes. So with that little if statement there, that should ensure that if we're able to move past that point in this page, that we do actually have a get ID to work with. Let's see, I then have my colors array, my errors array, my field names, all of which are still going to be needed. I have my scalar variables for holding all the individual values of a color. Those I'm still going to need. I have my big if statement that checks to see if the form has been submitted. That's definitely still going to be needed. But there's going to be something else I'm going to need to do before all of that. And that's that since this is the edit page, before I actually check and go in and do whatever it's supposed to do when the form's submitted, I have to prepare the form with the data that's already available. I think in this copy that we made from the new page, we already have in here the code that will go through and load all of the colors from the file. I believe this is it right here. So let me grab this code that actually loads all the colors from the file, and instead of having it only here if the form's been submitted and if we've passed validation, let me take that code and let me move it back up here outside that if statement so that it essentially happens no matter what. I'll go ahead and drop that in right there. So now, when this page loads, if we have an ID, we go through, we declare all of our different variables, and then immediately we load all our colors from the file. Once we actually go and load all of our colors from the file, then at that point I could go ahead and identify the particular color that we're supposed to be editing here. I should be able to do that based on the ID. Let me throw in another if statement. I'm again going to say if is set, but this time what I want to see is if there is an actual color in our colors array that contains the ID number that it is that we're supposed to be editing. So I'm using the ID value that was passed in as a get parameter as the key for my colors array to hopefully grab or spot whether there is the appropriate color there in that array or not. If it's there, then I'm going to want to pull it out so that I can have it sort of on its own to be able to work with it. If it isn't there, then that means that we were given an ID but a bad ID, and we'll again want to redirect the user somewhere else. So let me see here. What I'm going to do next then prepare for that if statement is let me go ahead and make myself a new variable, selected color. Again, very much like what we had done back over in the show page. I'm going to go ahead and initialize it to null. And then I'm going to say if we do have that particular color in the colors array, I'll pull it out and I'll put it into the selected color variable. There we are. And if for some reason we don't have a color by that ID in our colors array, then we have a problem. What I'll do in that case is I want to redirect the user away. So again, a header function, and I'll send them back over to the index page like I did a minute ago. Was it error 2 I used a minute ago? Oh, error 1. Let me go ahead and do the same one. We'll just use that to generally mean bad ID. Okay, so running back through what's going on in this page now, I start off making sure I have an ID at all. Maybe it's a good ID, maybe it's not. I then go through and declare lots of variables. Then I read all the data from my colors file. And then, if I actually have a color by that ID, I put it into its own special variable, selected color. If I don't, I redirect the user to a different page. So at that point, we should have the actual color loaded. If we have the actual color loaded, I would like at that point to be able to take the values out of it and put it into my individual variables that I'd set up for those colors, the color parts. So let me take that extract statement then and drop it outside the if statement. So all of this now is going to happen even if the form has not been submitted. That's the basic idea. So even without the rest of this code then filled in, let's go ahead and give it a try. Well, maybe we should go down and look at the form first, but I think we might be pretty close to being able to give this a first try. In the if statement, I'm not submitting the form yet, so I'm not going to worry about what's going on in there. Down in the actual body, I have the displaying of error messages for validation, which I shouldn't have to worry about yet. And then I have my loop that I put in the new video, the video for the new page, where we go through and we build our form, and this should be accessing the variables that I'm filling with the extract statement that I just put in. Let's go give it a shot. Back over on the browser, accessing the edit page with an ID of 2, if I hit refresh, the edit page is showing up just fine, but I don't see my actual color values being filled in. Let's give it another shot. Let me go back over to home. Let me try to edit this color. Well, we're definitely going to the edit page just fine. I need to update the title and probably where this form submits to. But what worries me most is that the colors don't seem to be getting filled in. Let's go see if we can figure out why that's happening. Oh, here I have a guess as to what might be going wrong. I'm pulling out the color that I'm trying to access and putting it into a variable called selected color. When I actually extract, though, I'm saying extract from the post array. It's not really the post array that I want to be extracting this from, it's from selected color. So let me try changing this variable over. So the value that goes into the individual variables for the colors attributes, the color name, red value, green value, blue value variables, I'm going to be pulling those values out of the selected color array, the actual color that we've retrieved, instead of pulling it out of the post array. It kind of makes sense that everything was showing up blank because in the post array there's no data, no form has been submitted at this point. Let's look at it in the browser and see if that fills in my form. If I go back over to my main page and click on the edit link for a color, still no filling into the form. Let's check and see if there's any errors in the code. I don't see any actual errors occurring, and at the same time we're also not getting redirected anywhere. So that makes me think that it sees that we do have an ID, it does see that we have a color based on that ID, but I'm dropping the ball somewhere with getting that data transferred over and filled into the actual fields. Let's go look at the code again. Oh, I think I might still have a problem here in the same general area. The problem here might be that the values, or the keys that I'm using to store the values in selected color, don't actually match the field names themselves. Maybe I should try and make sure those two go along with each other. The names of these fields are supposed to be color name, red value, green value, blue value, but what I'm actually calling them is just name ID, red, green, and blue. So let me try changing these over so everything matches a little bit better. So color name, red value, green value, and blue value. The reason that would cause a problem is it's that array that I'm trying to extract from with my extract statement. The extract statement, though, looks for variables with the exact same name, so the names that I have here as the keys in the array have to exactly match the names of these variables, otherwise extract won't work. So with that change made, let's go back to the browser and give it another try. Aha, there, eureka. It's fun when you have problems and you solve them. So now when I click on the rattlesnake color, I'm being taken to an edit page where it does actually fill in that data. Let's try another color. If I try Tempe Gold, I'll click the edit link for it, and there's Tempe Gold filled into my form. Before I forget, let me go ahead and fix the title and the page that this form submits to. Back over in the code, down in the body, I want to make sure that my edit page submits to itself, not to the new page. So I'll make that little change there, and then cosmetically, let me change the submit button at the bottom so it doesn't say save. Instead, I'll have it say update. There we are. And the header at the top of this page, instead of saying create color, I'm going to have it say edit color. There we are. Jumping back over to the browser, hitting refresh, just a few fairly cosmetic changes, plus the fact that when I submit, it will now submit back to itself again. So very definite progress. Going back to the code now, the second step, now that the page basically works in the mode that it is in when it is first visited before any actual updates are made, to now the second step to look at what happens when the user actually submits the form. When the user actually does submit the form, of course the data that's in the form, the updated version of that data, if you want to think of it that way, will be submitted in the post array right back to this page again. This page will start off then doing the exact same things it did before, checking to make sure that we have an ID, declaring all the different variables, reading all the colors from the file, finding the color based on the ID and pulling it out, putting it into the selected color variable, extracting the selected color variable and putting those values into our individual variables. So all that will happen the same, but now that we've submitted the form, we'll also then land here at this if statement. Here in this if statement, which again, remember I copied from the new page, we start off by actually doing our simple validation here. Our simple validation at the moment is just checking to make sure all the fields aren't empty, and I could actually live with that. We could keep that. The only trick I see potentially here is that I'm accessing individual variables here. This is a variable where $name is the actual name of a variable that I'm using. $name comes from my field names array. So that's going to go through each of the individual variables whose names match the names of my fields. The only trick with that is that those values are the ones that I filled in from selected color. So essentially what I would be validating here would be the data from the file, not the data from the form. So before I proceed with trying to do the validation, let me go back and do extract again. A different extract if we have done a form submission, where I now pull the data out of the post array. So it's the data from the post array that's in those individual variables, and it'll be the data from the post array that we actually validate. I think that will also work better from a usability standpoint, in that when the user makes a change on the form and submits it, if there are validation problems and the form doesn't submit and then redirect them to another page, what they will be left looking at in the form itself will be the data they filled into the form most recently, not a copy of the data taken from the file again. So since I'm extracting the data from post, that is the most recent copy of the data from the form, that's the data that's being put into the variables, and it's the variables that are used to populate the fields. So I think for a couple good reasons that should help a few things. Next thing we do after that then is we say if there are no errors, and then we're launching here into the process of actually finding the next available ID. Since we're editing here, we already know our ID, so that's actually not going to be at all necessary. So I'm going to wipe that part out. We needed to find an ID when we are creating a new color, but when we're working with a color that already has an ID, it just keeps the ID that it has. It doesn't need a new one. The next thing that happens, if there are no validation IDs, is we open our file in append mode. Now this is the section that's really going to need to change quite a bit, right? I'm not going to append a new color. What I'm actually probably going to end up wanting to do is to overwrite essentially the colors that are in my file, and then to go ahead and write out all the colors that I already have. That part of the file is going to be different enough. I think what I'm going to do for right now is I'm essentially just going to sort of erase that little bit. Matter of fact, maybe I'll just clean out this entire if statement. Maybe I'll even get rid of the else that goes with it. And then this is the place we'll need to return to and write something that's a little bit more specialized, specifically for this page. But let's go ahead. I actually just thought of something else. If I leave this in here and I submit the form and there's no validation errors, calling fopen with write is going to blank out my file. So for the moment, let me actually go ahead and comment that out as well. I'll just comment out that entire thing until we're ready from it, so nothing destructive will happen. So let's go ahead and see if we can submit our form and see what happens. Back over in the browser, the page is still loading just like it was before. Everything's looking pretty all right. If I go ahead and click update for this color, now technically I haven't actually changed anything, but let's just give it a try. I end up shooting right back over to my index page, which you might think, well, okay, I guess that would be kind of normal in a way. But if you look real closely up here at the address bar, you'll see that we actually got back to the index page because of an error. It's coming back and it's saying error 1. Well, what actually happened there? When I go over to the edit page and I try to update, there's some kind of error that's occurring. That wasn't happening before. That's only happening now that I'm clicking the update button, so it seems to have something to do with something that's changed. Changed during the submission of the edit page when the user actually tries to update the form. Right? If you remember back, there were a couple of different situations that could have resulted in us being sent back to the index page with the error. One was that we were given no ID at all, that very first if statement we had at the top of the edit page. The other one, very similar to that, which also is an error 1, and that's if we couldn't find a color with that ID. Maybe to try to narrow it down, what I could do is instead of having 1 for both of them, I'll have the first one be error 1 and the second one be error 2, kind of my own little custom error checking code. All right, so now if the page isn't getting an ID at all, we'll see error 1 in the address bar. If it's getting an ID but then can't find a matching color, we'll get error 2. Let's give that a try and see if that helps. So if I go and I edit my first color, I click update, it's error 1 that's occurring. So this if statement at the very top of our edit page is triggering, is true, whenever we try to update a color. This is where we were saying if not is set get ID. So essentially we're saying if we don't have an ID to work with, send the user back to the index page with error 1. We have an ID to work with whenever we first go to the page. If I click edit, I can see the ID right there. When I click update though, why isn't it recognizing it? Well, hopefully you've already guessed, right? When we actually submit our form, what's happening is that is a new submission. It is a new request resulting in a new response. So the fact that the ID was there previously doesn't actually make any difference. When I submit my form, we're going to this URL right here, edit.php, and as you can see, that does not include an ID number. So whenever we submit the form, we go to the edit page, but no ID is given as a get parameter. Since no ID is given as a get parameter, that triggers that if statement at the very top of our edit page, causing us to be sent back to the index page. I could fix that pretty easily just by making sure I include the ID number right here. Hopefully that will do the trick. Let's see if that cleans things up a little bit. Back in the browser again, if I go to edit my color, when I hit update now, very good. We stay on the same page. We keep the ID that we had before. The only thing we're lacking now is the code to actually rewrite that data. Before we go in and do that, let's check the validation. Let me come over and fiddle with another color. Let me play with my green color here. I like that rattlesnake color too much, but this green is a little ugly. Let's see if I wipe out the color's name and submit. Good. It looks like my validation that I carried over from my new page is doing a pretty good job. Wipe out some other fields. Looks nice. Yeah, I think validation's all doing just fine, so it doesn't look like we have too much of anything to worry about right there. So let's go over and take a look then at actually getting the color updated in the file. Before I actually update my data in my file, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a backup copy of my data. Very often it's real easy to accidentally corrupt your data, so I want to go ahead and make sure that I have a backup copy available so I don't have to re-enter all these sample colors again. All right, I took and copied my color data over to a different file, so I've got it ready to come back as soon as I mess it up, which I'm fairly certain I will. It always happens the first time or two. All right, let's jump back up to the top of the edit page then, and let's work on how are we actually going to update the data in the file. Now, when it comes to actually updating the data in the file, there's a number of different ways we could potentially do this. Some easy, some hard, some efficient, some less efficient. What I'm going to shoot for here in this file is less efficient and more easy. So kind of the cheap way out in a way, but I feel that's fairly justified. If we were really looking for efficiency, what we would probably need to be doing instead of using a flat file is using a database instead. I'll use the fact that we're using a text file as our data store as an excuse to be a little bit lazy here and go about updating this file in a pretty easy way. Essentially what I want to do is instead of actually finding my way into the file, finding the particular line that needs to be updated, and then making the actual updates in that line, which is possible but very difficult, what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to overwrite the file. I'm just going to erase the file the way it is on disk right now and replace it with all of the new colors, or all of the same colors, including the color that's now also been updated. So you might remember back up here, I've already gone through the process of loading all of the colors. They're all in an array here called colors. What I really want to do is just put my updated color into place in that array and then just write that entire array back to the file. Since all of our colors are stored in that colors array based on their ID, it should be pretty easy to take my updated color and to drop it back into place. I'm going to say into my colors array, into the position that's identified by the ID variable, right? The ID variable being the variable that holds the ID that we extracted. Oh, we didn't, did we? We probably should though. How about we go ahead and get the ID, and I'll go ahead and put into it the ID for this particular color, which is in the get array. There, so I then have that available. Then into the colors array, into that particular position identified by that ID, I want to go ahead and put in my new updated color. Now there's already a color there in that position. Remember, each one of the colors in each of the positions in the colors array is themselves actually arrays. So let me go ahead and just assign on top of, essentially erasing the old array and replacing it with a new array, an array that then contains the updated data from the form. Now we have all the colors in our colors array set up as associative arrays. They all have the names of the different fields in them, the way we have them there. So I need to go ahead and put this new array together in an associative way. So let me say into the key of ID store the value that's in my ID variable, and then I can go through and do the same thing for all the other fields. There we are. So my new array that I'm creating and putting in will look, I think, something like this. Hopefully that will be okay. Each one of the separate pieces of data simply stored in an element with its name as its key. All right, so at that point, my colors array should contain all of my colors, including the replacement color, the updated color. What I then need to do is I just need to go through and write all that data back out to my file again. So here I'm opening my file, an if statement to confirm that the file is open, and then I'm ready to actually go through and start writing the data. How about I start by taking each one of my colors, or how about we start with a loop? Actually, I guess would be the best place to start. We could do a for each loop to go through our colors array. So I'll go through each one of my colors, pulling out all of its data and writing them or referencing them as fields. And then what I want to do is take that group of fields, turn it into a string, and write it out to the file. Let me throw my fclose in here before I forget. All right, so to take each one of these sets of fields and turn them into a string, I'll go ahead and create an output variable, and then into that output variable is where I want to put all the different fields in their data. Here we are. I took and broke this line up over a couple of lines so it wouldn't go off the side of my screen so you could see it a little bit easier. I also went back and did the exact same thing up here when I was putting together my updated color in the array. But essentially here in my output line where I'm trying to take my color and turn it into a string to be written out to the file, I'm just taking the ID, I'm appending to that a tab character, then I take the color's name, append to that a tab character. I do the same thing with the red value, the green value, the blue value, a tab between each field, and then a new line character here at the very end. Very much like the way we did back in the new page. It's been a while since we did that, so I just wanted to point that out real quick. Once that string is actually put together, it's then ready to be actually written out to the file, so let me do an fwrite statement. In the fwrite statement, I just need to tell it what file to write to, and then the name of the string that I actually want it to write out. So I'll say fwrite to my file, the output string that I've just put together. Remember, this is all happening here inside this for each loop, so that should happen once for each one of my individual colors. Once that is all done, hopefully all of our colors will be written back out. We're closing our file, so it'll flush all the output buffers and the file should get written. We can see if it actually works or not. The one other thing that I want to throw in here is that after I've actually written the color, assuming there were no validation problems, assuming we write the data out to the file with no problem, I don't want to leave the user sitting there staring at the form. I would like at that point to redirect them maybe back to the show page for the particular color, for the color that was just updated. So let me throw in a header statement and an exit. I'll throw in a header. Let's send them to the location, show.php. I need to give the show page an ID. And the ID itself is actually in an ID variable at this point. Since that is just a simple variable, I can go ahead and just interpolate it into that string easily enough. Let me go ahead and do an exit statement then. Make sure nothing else happens. And the user should then, as soon as the color has been rewritten to the file, be immediately redirected over to the show page, where the show page will reread all the data from the color file, which will include this updated data. So they should see a new copy, an updated copy of whatever color it was they were editing. Let's go give it a try. Back over in the browser, let's just start the process again here a little fresh. Let me go update my green color here. I'm going to say update, and let's start with something easy. Let's just see if we can update its name. Instead of green, let's call it bright green. So I'll change that to bright green. I hit update, and bright green is where I end up. Right? Back over at the show page. It looks like things are working real well right there. Maybe I'll jump back over to the home. Everything looks very good. Right? Let's see if we can edit bright green again. Right? Instead of bright green, maybe I want to make this dark green. Okay? So dark green. Let's change the green value here. There we are. When I was typing, I purposely went down and erased the blue value just to make sure validation was working okay, and it looks like it is. I'll go ahead and put in the proper blue value again, and once again I'll try to update. And now we have a dark green instead of a bright green. Wow, this might be the first time ever that I didn't corrupt a data file when I was writing an update page for the first time. Let me go back. Let's try another one. Let's try our... let's see, how about our blue? Let's make it dark blue. So I'm going to click and go to the show page for our blue. I'm going to say edit blue. Let's make it dark blue. And instead of F's, I'll put in 9s for the blue values. That should darken it up a bit. And when I submit, it seems like it works like a champ. Can't think of anything immediately off the top of my head that we've left out, but I think we have a fairly decent working edit page at that point. So a fairly decent working edit page. So at this point we have the ability to be able to read our colors from our file in two different ways, with the edit and with the index and the show page. We have the ability to create new colors with our new page, and now we have the ability to update our colors. So we've done the C, R, and U out of CRUD, create, read, and update. The only thing we have left to do now is to delete, which we will tackle next time.